our people in so many ways. Therefore, fill us all with the knowledge of your holy word, as it states, that to whom much is given, much more is required. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, 2nd December 2025 to be confirmed. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
The questions that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, 16th December 2025 to be deferred. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The questions that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Announcements by Your Honour, the Speaker. Messages from His Excellency the President. Petitions, papers. Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The questions that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 10, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move the second reading of the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2025.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the outset, I would want to formally wish all of my colleagues and certainly the general public a happy new year. We ended last year, I believe, on a high with much to be thankful for. And all of us certainly look forward to a year that allows us to fulfill a number of the promises, a number of the expectations of the general public. And I expect that certainly my colleagues on this side will continue to do the work that the people of this country have sent us here to do. It is in that vein, Mr. Speaker, that I have the responsibility this morning to be able to lead a debate in relation to an amendment to the Road Traffic Act. It is no mystery to this chamber or to the public that the Road Traffic Act is one of the pieces of legislation that has been perhaps most tampered with, most amended over the course of decades. It is a piece of legislation that came into effect in 1981. And it governs the regulation of traffic in Barbados. It includes the vehicle registration process, the licensing process, and certainly provision being made for safety measures to allow for commuters to traverse the roads of the island. We also have accompanying the Road Traffic Act a number of regulations made by virtue of that piece of legislation. They govern as well licensing, vehicle registration requirements such as the inspection, the taxation, insurance, and traffic, and certainly conduct in relation to traffic rules, as well as offenses and penalties in respect of violations. The Act has been amended on many occasions, primarily because it has had to respond, or rather legislation has had to respond to safety issues in many cases, the number of vehicles on the road, the changes in technology. And as a consequence, we have had to keep up to date with what the overseas, the international trends are, certainly the regional trends, in relation to amendments to this specific piece of legislation. And today, therefore, I have the pleasure of being able to yet again make the necessary amendments to this particular piece of legislation. Over the years, we've seen amendments to things like the seatbelt rules, which again was a measure to ensure that people were kept safe, and certainly in particular our children. We have seen the abolition of road tax and the introduction of registration fees, certainly by this administration during its tenure in the last few years. And we've also seen the regulations passed for the windscreen and windows regulation, which was passed to address the issues of road safety, to improve visibility and compliance with the law enforcement. And I refer specifically to last year's amendment in relation to what Bajans simply refer to as tint. It is therefore not unusual that these amendments have come in respect of this piece of legislation. And therefore today, this particular bill states, if you look at it, that it is an amendment to make better provision for the prescribing of fixed penalties for certain offenses. So as I start at the outset, let me say that fixed penalties, which I will proceed to explain, already exist in the existing legislation, but what we seek here to do is to make improvements to modernize and to make the system for the payment of fixed penalties a lot more efficient than it currently is. In particular, we want to be able to make sure that the general public, who has been frustrated from time to time with having to have a ticketed offense, they go and they have a traffic violation, and they spend lots of time before the courts, taking a lot of productive time out of their day to be able to go down to the law courts. And everybody has to turn up on time. Everybody has to make sure that they clock in to the magistrate's court in many cases, and they spend an entire day before the system. We believe that a fixed penalty regime is necessary, but the fact that we have had no amendments to this legislation for such a long time is also a reflection that it is now time to pay some attention to this particular regime that allows people, once they are ticketed, to be able to pay these penalties not only a lot faster, but to avoid the situation where we are clogging up our law courts, we're wasting a lot of productive time of our officials, and we're wasting productive time of our citizens as well. So what is a fixed penalty? Is one of the things that we need to address. What is the existing regime? What are we seeking to do today to make that regime better? And through the course of this presentation this morning, I will seek to answer all of those questions to assure the public that what we do here today is really in their interests, and certainly in the interest of modernizing the court system, but also making our roads safer, and certainly modernizing the existing system. If you take a look at Section 12110 of the Road Traffic Act, it provides that a fixed penalty is either A, $50, B, half the maximum fine to which a person not previously convicted is liable on summary conviction of that offense, whichever is less, or C, that such fine as the minister prescribes, not exceeding half the maximum amount of that fine to which a person not previously convicted is liable on summary conviction for that offense. Most people are familiar with the $50 because usually when you get a ticket, as we would say, for a traffic violation, the traffic wardens would issue the ticket, and you are more familiar with perhaps the $50. If you end up going before the courts, then sections 12110B and C tend to be the ones that are then enforced given the circumstances by the magistrate. The section goes on at 10A to deal with public service vehicles. And it is no mystery that when I read this section, many of you will ask, well, why has it taken this long for us to even address this section, given what we consider in many cases to be reckless behavior by some on our roads? But again, this is a continuum, and you will note that we have continuously tried to address a long-standing problem regarding reckless behavior on our roads by a number of persons, and I would say a small number of persons who drive public service vehicles. And this section basically allows for the courts to impose either of those fixed penalties that I mentioned previously, where a person is carrying up to 5 passengers in excess of the authorized number, the fine would be $25. Where the persons are carrying 6 or more passengers in addition to the $25 charge, they would then be charged $25 for each passenger then in excess of the 5 passengers, up to a maximum of 10 passengers in excess of the 5. I think it is fair to say that what currently exists in law in relation to that, because we all know, we've all been students, we've caught vans, we've seen the minibuses along the road. We've seen the excess passengers being piled into vehicles, particularly sometimes to take our school children to and fro. And we are well aware that the system itself currently in its present form does not necessarily support the ability to be able to record those offenses and to be able to ticket the drivers of those vehicles in compliance with this law. So many of you will ask yourselves, well, have these tickets even been issued over the course of the last few years, and in what quantum have they actually been issued? Well, this is one of the things that we are seeking to address today. When you look at 10B, it provided that there would be a $50 penalty, for instance, applied where persons exceeded the speed limit. At 10B2, the current legislation provides that the fixed penalty for exceeding the speed limit by up to 20 kilometers per hour is $75. Now again, I think it would be fair to say that not only are these fines low, but oftentimes when you are ticketed, because as I said earlier, it takes so long for these matters to get before the court and for them to be disposed of, you have many situations where people complain that, you know, an offense taking place today for going above the speed limit. The matter has taken, you know, almost a decade before it has actually reared its head in the court of law, or before they even see the summons. We also have a situation where people feel that they can make a call to dispose of matters, and sometimes perhaps matters go away. I'm not here to speak to that, but to say that these are the realities of life. And I think that we have to, as we improve the operations and modernize systems, we have to bring an end to that reliance where you can call somebody and something simply goes away. And therefore, I think where there's certainty in law, when an offense is committed, where there is an opportunity for the public to be able to pay for that penalty when it is imposed quickly so that it can be disposed of, is certainly the correct way for a society that is now more developed than it was back in the 1980s, that is the way that we should be developing our legislation to make sure that you can't call a friend, you can't call nobody to be able to ask for anything to be disposed of. One of the things that has motivated the changes that I am speaking of today is that the public outcry cannot be ignored. I think we have heard repeatedly at whether it is our Parish Speaks or engagement with our constituents in every forum, we have heard the public outcry for us as a government to simplify processes, to make things easier, whether in terms of business or in terms of just systems in our country, to be able to make life a bit easier for Barbadians. We recognize that in the existing legislation as well, that a number of the offenses that exist, and I think there are probably about 16 or 17 offenses, that these offenses do not accurately reflect the concerns that Barbadians have. It also does not accurately reflect the legal changes that have been made over the course of the last few decades in relation to other amendments to the road traffic legislation and to other ancillary pieces of legislation as well. And it therefore means that when we look at what currently exists, if we are beginning the modernization of our court system or licensing authority, then equally we must look at how do we adequately reflect the changes in thought of Barbadians about what should carry a greater penalty, what offenses should now be included because of behaviors that have crept into our society, to make sure that we capture people who are repeat offenders, and in some cases they have become great offenders at being able to do things that many of us frown upon from day to day. We also cannot ignore the fact that any penalty regime must also be commensurate with the type and the seriousness of the offense. And that is why I speak to the fact that we listen as a government and we recognize that there are some offenses that the public repeatedly speaks to as areas of concern for them. And I don't think that we can, given that we listen often to what is said in these various forums, that we can put ourselves in a position where we continue to ignore that there are legitimate concerns by the public. We cannot also ignore that the court process is lengthy. As I said before, that we are losing valuable time of the citizens, that the use of the court as we start to modernize even more, that we want to make sure that it is not a place of frustration, but rather that it is a place where we can settle matters in a timely manner, that there's some level of certainty when you go before the courts as to what to expect. Or in some cases, simply as we seek to do here today, that we make sure that for several offenses which are being committed and for violations that are taking place on a day-to-day basis, that we give the public the option to be able to pay those offenses quickly, to dispose of those matters quickly. We also cannot ignore the fact that many of the matters are old, that many of the files are old, that we're asking officers in various departments of the court to rummage through very old files that, again, before the introduction of the technology as we know it today, that many of these systems were paper-based, and that they find themselves in a situation where many of the files are dated, they have gotten damp because of the conditions in which sometimes they are stored, and it creates a problem for us from an environmental perspective, having to ask people to go to deal with files that are certainly dated and certainly in a condition that may create some respiratory issues. It therefore means if we can, going forward, have a system that is quick and nimble to be able to allow people to pay quickly, to be able to reduce the waiting times, that we are actually addressing some of the underlying issues that the public and certainly our officers in government have been drawing to our attention. And then perhaps the other thing that we cannot ignore that has brought us to this point by virtue of this amendment is technology by way of ticketing. I think as I did my research, almost in every Caribbean territory, you see attempts being made to modernize their fixed penalty system, to introduce fixed penalties for a number of offenses. In some cases, it is traffic offenses, as we're doing here today. In some cases, it is modernizing for the offenses of littering. In some cases, it is ticketing for issues related to consumer protection. But in every instance, what you see as the trend across the Caribbean in particular is that fixed penalties have been on the statute books for decades. But in many cases, just like we are having to do today, there has not been the attention paid to it to modernize and to upgrade not only the offenses, but also the penalties associated with the fixed penalty regime. And so what we do here today is really, as I said, intended to be able to make and to bring improvements to a system that has become outdated and irrelevant, while at the same time taking into account that this is but one phase of the modernization that all of us would want to see across the entire system. So one of the things that we have done by this legislation today is that when we look at the offenses, I can say to you that we have already prepared the order by way of a draft, and it is a draft that will go to Cabinet on Thursday. We have had the opportunity working with the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, who is also the Attorney General, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, officers in MTW, the Ministry, the Public Works Ministry covering licensing generally as well. We've also met with the Transport Authority, Transport Board. We have had all of our representative stakeholders engaged in a discussion as it relates to not only the offenses that need to be included going forward, but also the level of penalties, and certainly a long discourse, a lengthy discourse as it relates to rethinking and relooking at the type of penalties and the message that we really want to send. So I can assure you that while we don't lay the actual order here today, that in the same vein as we have done with other pieces of legislation, the Health Services Regulation and others, that the intention will be that once this clears the order, the draft order goes before Cabinet on Thursday, and we then have our own ventilation at the level of Cabinet, that it is our intention, once it is approved, to circulate that to the general public so that they're aware of the new regime, but also what the associated penalties will also be as well. And I therefore look forward to us being able to do the usual communication to make sure that the public is fully apprised of what we are doing, and to be able to have the appropriate communication plan with the relevant authorities, allow us to break down these things. It is not complicated. We know what the existing law is. We know where we are coming from, but we also know that any modern society has to take certain steps to be able to evolve and to bring itself within the 21st century as well. That brings me to a discussion of the fact that this legislation will also now allow the minister to make the order. And I think that is particularly important because rather than, the law allows for us to make the order, the problem is that we've not been making the order for some time. And it also allows us now to do it by negative resolution, which again is consistent with the other pieces of legislation, which allows us not to have to keep coming back to Parliament to be able to have to make amendments to the penalty regime, and allows us to evolve as the public discourse on a lot of these matters obviously require us to make the relevant changes. It therefore brings me to a discussion certainly on further strengthening of this regime, because fixed penalties has a direct correlation to demerit points. I've heard, I believe it was in the Christchurch Parish Speaks, a very well-known gentleman raised the issue about demerit points, and at that meeting I recall drawing to the public's attention that demerit points actually exist on our statute books. What has been the challenge is that there was a period where demerit points were actually utilized within the law courts. And for a number of reasons, we found ourselves in a situation where there was a halt to the imposition of demerit points. And quite simply, in addition to fixed penalties, you have a regime which also, by the current law, allows for the courts, through the magistrate, to be able to impose points on offenders. And those points would accumulate. Different offenses carry different points. And as happens in the United Kingdom and other territories, when you reach a certain number of points, your license is either suspended or it is actually taken away completely. Now, we went through a period of utilizing that process. I believe there may have been many challenges because of the paperwork and not having certain things in order. And again, we have been in negotiations and consultation with the various stakeholders to make sure that we bring the necessary reform to the demerit point system. We have the draft papers in relation to what is required from licensing end, what is going to be required from the court systems end to make sure that we create a system, and it's not about reinventing the wheel, because again, the merit point system is throughout the Caribbean, it's throughout the international community, and it allows for people to know when they commit an offense or commit several offenses that there are consequences beyond simply just a fine. That if you continue to be a habitual offender, that you run the risk of having your license taken away or being disqualified for a period of time from driving. It also provides a regime that we are looking at where, for instance, new drivers may have a different regime brought in for them, because if they offend in a period of time close to when they've gotten the license, there may be some concerns regarding their ability to remain on the road for a particular period of time, or that they may have to retest. Before we bring the demerit points amendments, one of the things that is important is that we have to get the regime correct. Because I believe that when you look at the demerit point system as it currently exists, you will recognize that, again, a number of the offenses that ought to be included have actually not been included in the current demerit point system. And therefore, it means for judges that, and the persons in the magistrates, that they have not been able to capture offenders in certainly the way that I'm sure they would want to be able to impose the penalties that are necessary. So put simply, we have a lot of people who go before the courts who a fine may be imposed on them, but that should also come with a commensurate demerit point for the offense which they have committed. It is not now existing, and what we will be seeking to do very shortly is to bring that regime to make sure that people are also captured in that net, that they do not continue to offend and offend and offend in a situation where we ought to give them a warning so that they are aware that their behavior on our roads in this country are unacceptable. And that is another part of the fixed penalty system that I want to assure the country today that we have reflected on. We have been in long discussions as well with the stakeholders to make sure that we get this right. We are drawing on the region, we are drawing internationally to make sure that we are able to update our existing laws in relation to the demerit point system. I would not be able, Mr. Speaker, to speak about modernization, perhaps without being able to give out just go a little wider in terms of some of the concerns, because while we seek to do this today, there's a reality that across the licensing system, everything that is governed by the Road Traffic Act, that we have had our challenges. And we have had our challenges over time, but it has not left us in a situation where we have not sought to improve. This administration has had some challenges recently, for instance, in relation to the licensing authority. And we have dealt with them frontally because we have had equipment that basically shut down. And I think all of us who have had, whether computers or any form of technology from time to time, knows that with all the best will in the world, with all of the attempts to be able to make sure that we can ensure that our systems are fully functioning, sometimes things happen that are simply beyond the control of our technical teams. And regrettably, at Licensing Authority, we had one such situation which impacted on vehicle registration, which again goes to the heart and core of ordinary Barbadians trying to get their vehicles registered, trying to get their PSVs registered, trying to get their trucks registered, trying to get simply on the road with their vehicles. We have been working towards a new driver's license management system. And in the process of transitioning to that as well, we've had a few challenges, but we are at a point now where the future looks bright in terms of being able to do appointments online for people who are seeking to do driver's licenses applications. As many of you are aware, you know, I say to my staff that the process of obtaining a driver's license has not changed much since certainly I was at the age of 18. And I would have gotten my license so long ago. And even the way in which the licensing authority's yard is structured. I often say to them that I feel as though we have been trying to fail people before they even get onto the main road. And we have been looking at how to restructure even the yard at licensing, how to decentralize services in other locations so that we don't have a bottleneck at the Pine location. We have started by way of doing the customer care center at the licensing authority, which is next door to the Barbados Revenue Authority. And I know that sometimes there's always a confusion as to what services are offered by the Barbados Licensing Authority versus the Barbados Revenue Authority. But put simply, the Revenue Authority collects money. They have had to perform a number of the functions of licensing over the last few years, but licensing has also started to take back some of those functions and allow the Barbados Revenue Authority to be able to collect revenue. Sometimes what happens is that the system at Revenue Authority goes down. Sometimes what happens is that the system at licensing goes down, and that creates the frustration. And that is why we've been working to be able to merge the systems to make sure that we do not have the level of frustration that is taking place in the country as it relates to vehicle registration. We have, since the challenges we experienced a few weeks ago, we have brought on a number of staff, and the reality is that when we bring in additional hands to help the existing staff do the work, one of the biggest issues is that they have to be trained. Now, we don't have the luxury at licensing where we can stop operations completely and go and train people. We don't have the luxury of being able, apart from doing overtime, which that is something on the table as well, where the same staff that the public is interfacing with are then expected to be able to work the long hours, to come in on the weekends, and to train the staff that we have brought in. And I want to say today that these things do take time. It is regrettable that we find ourselves in a situation where we have had the interruption of business at the level that we've had at licensing. But my team at the licensing authority, and certainly our developers outside of Barbados, along with MIST as well, have been working through the night, through the day, to be able to improve the system and to be able to get us back on track at the licensing authority. We've been able to reduce the backlog significantly, and my hope is that with the additional staff that we have brought on, once they are trained up, we will be in a position to be able to have those numbers further significantly reduced as well. It is a case right now of the workload versus the manpower, and until we are in a position to get the manpower up to the level that we need it to be, obviously we are going to continue to have a bit of delays and stuff at the licensing authority. We have also, in the process of this challenge, and it was on the cards for a little while, but we've approved some additional garages to be able to take the pressure off of licensing, so that we can get them to be able to do the registrations. I think there's one more tweak that has to be made to have that fully operational, but that was in recognition of the fact that the load that has been being placed on the licensing authority, particularly with the increasing number of vehicles in this country, has placed an unnecessary burden on the staff of licensing, and we needed to be able to decentralize, in some cases, those functions which are possibly able to be done by other parties with the oversight taking place by the licensing authority. We have also explored the possibility to help with the backlog at licensing, the reopening of the office at Oistins, and the Chief Licensing Officer, the PS, and others have been engaging with the Ministry of Housing, who has responsibility for that particular location, to be able to allow us to expand the services there and to get things up and running. So, Mr. Speaker, I know that the challenges have been many in the past few weeks that has caused that level of disruption, but just like we're doing here today with fixed penalties, and that what we have to come in the future in relation to demerit points to be able to improve the regime under which we are able to deliver our services under the Road Traffic Act, and certainly in the Magistrates Court. our intention is to continue to modernize. Modernization and transformation does not, Mr. Speaker, happen overnight. In many cases, we are changing behavior, we are changing systems, we are changing attitudes, we are simply changing locations in terms of how we do business. And therefore, you have already seen improvements in many aspects of how we govern, but these are areas that require not only resources, but in many cases, they take a bit more time because we are making a transition and we have to train people in order to be able to deliver on the services that are being provided. So we feel the frustration, we know the frustration, and as a government, that is why we are committed with the necessary resources to being able to out some of these fires that have been long-standing. I often say to people that the licensing authority in particular has been treated as an outside child, and that was even from the days of perhaps sometimes the selection of people who lead organizations presents its own challenges because leadership does matter. We have sought to rectify those issues, and I believe that we are on the right trajectory as we move forward with certainly a lot more integration of our staff and an involvement of our staff being able to lift the morale of the staff at the licensing because they do a job which requires them to be able to be level-headed at all times to ensure that their engagement with the public is one that service delivery is always at the forefront of their minds and certainly in terms of what we expect from them. So yes, we have had our challenges, Mr. Speaker, but consistent rather with how we are dealing with all aspects of governance, we intend to make sure that this is no different. As it relates to safety issues, we continue to embark on our programs to remark our roads, to make sure that our roads are safe. I will not expand this debate, Mr. Speaker, so you do not have to worry about me talking about my roads, my record, and the record of MTW speaks for itself. We have pothole patchers. I know the Honourable Leader of the Opposition likes to talk about potholes. Perhaps he has followed in the steps of his predecessor in the belief that potholes are transient inconveniences. This administration does not take that view. And while we accept that work had not been done for the years, the decade prior to us, we came to office and we've embarked on an ambitious program to make sure that we deliver on years of not having roadworks done in this country. And not just roadworks, sir. We have also embarked on making sure that our bridges are made safer, that we don't ignore studies of 1984 that told us that our bridges were deteriorating. So when we hear the cries from the other side, Mr. Speaker, of deteriorating infrastructure, I say to you that they must fall on deaf ears. Because if they did not do the work that was necessary when they had the opportunity to do it, I give you the assurance that this administration has not faltered in its responsibility, step by step, day by day, minister after minister, to make sure that we are able to make wrong things right. And I hope that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and Member for Christchurch South takes those notes because those are the facts, sir. And no matter how attempts are made to distort facts, every single Barbadian in this country knows that roadworks are ongoing. They may not, as with everything, sir, everything may not move at the pace that people will like. But we have made sure that we have been able to deliver on a process of transformation and modernization of roads in this country. I have 6 pothole patchers coming to this country as we promised and as we will deliver later this month. We train our staff and we get them on the road while they are training to be able to start to deliver on the potholes that are in the country. But potholes are also a result, sir, of climate change. And there are things that are beyond the control, in many cases, of this administration. And we seek to make sure that we are able to accelerate our programs to make sure that our roads are safe, that our court system works, that our bridges are safe, that our licensing authority is improved, that all the things that the Road Traffic Act is intended to be able to encompass that as a ministry, that we are working step by step to be able to deliver on those various things. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend this bill to this House and to ask this chamber to support the relevant amendments. It's not a debate that I believe will be lengthy, but I think it is one that is important because all of us are affected in one way or the other as we interchange and have discussions with our constituents regarding the Road Traffic Act from time to time, and certainly as we discuss the frustrations that people experience as they interface with the court system, and certainly we want to make sure that our citizens' time in relation to productivity is certainly reduced and brought to a bare minimum. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I therefore beg to move that this bill do not pass. And that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable Member for Christchurch South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. The Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast closed their presentation by observing that I take notes. And the Honourable Member is so correct. I have taken notes. As a part of my duty to this Parliament and the Republic of Barbados to follow debates very closely and to respond to what has been offered by way of legislation, in this case, Amendment